While Windbound is not a combat focused game, it still has enough options to leave you stuck when choosing your loadout. Today, this challenge will focus on melee weapons only. Unlike our last challenge video, the tips I will be discussing today will be much more focused on combat rather than survivability. Since we can actually fight this time, it opens up a lot more of the game to us and, in my opinion, makes this challenge more interesting as well as more difficult. In this challenge, we will only be using melee weapons, only eating meat, using no physical blessings, for example the Ancestral Spear, and we will be going for all the boss takedowns. On top of this, to really make this a challenge, I chose Survivalist difficulty, making the combat slightly harder and death more punishing. Now at the time of this recording, the up close and personal achievement is bugged and you will most likely not get it even if you follow the rules. Hopefully by the time you watch this it is patched and the challenge is more rewarding upon completion. There isn't really anything else to talk about here, so let's get started. Since we can only eat meat in this challenge, you will be collecting more than just grass and rocks on the first island. You will most likely starve to death if you don't collect food right away, so try to kill the razorbacks in the area. You won't return here later, so you can do whatever you want to the island. As well as food, you'll collect bones and leather whether you like it or not. Hang on to these since you will need them very soon. Try and not get hurt by the razorbacks since they hit really hard on survivalist mode. They make a noise just before they try and hit you, so dodge when they do that. Once you have collected the ancestral ore, build your grass canoe and start sailing. Get yourself to an island that has sticks and build a drying rack on your boat. While you leave the food and leather roasting, it's a good idea to collect loose resources lying around. 5 palm fronds and 2 ropes will net you an extra 7 inventory slots. Crafting this felt great since we could not even consider this in our last challenge, and once your fire has finished, it's time for your first weapon. You can use your sticks to create stick spears, but why stop there? Craft a bone-tipped spear using the bones and leather you've gathered to give yourself a huge power boost nice and early on. Leather is your best friend in this challenge and it is fairly common in the early chapters, so gather as much as you can while you can. And with our first weapons, it's time for our first boss. Even with just the knife, the Gorehorn is not much of a challenge. If you stay close to it, you will never have to deal with the charge attacks, and its melee attacks are obvious, making it easy to dodge. Your bone spear will hit very hard against it, but be careful, it will hit just as hard back, and without any health upgrades you can die in about 3 hits. In my case, the Gorehorn was scared of me and tried to run away, letting me get a few easy hits in. Once I'd defeated both the Gorehorns, it was time to look for treasure before finishing the chapter. If you follow this challenge's exact rules, don't waste your time if you find a pumpkin because all of the blessings are physical, which we're not using this time. The most important finds are stamina upgrades early on and gemstones later on. And with that, you should be ready for the first crossing. Early on, the crossings are not too different from the last challenge, so I won't waste a lot of time talking about them. At least this time, I activated the blessings, and in the first chapter, I managed to get a lower stamina drain when sprinting, which covers a lack of stamina early on. Chapter 2 opens up the Savannah biome to us. Here we can collect bamboo and blood bristles, which are both very useful resources. Bamboo will allow us to make our boat stronger, which is absolutely necessary. Since there is no way for us to become even more powerful as of now, I just collected more leather and bone since they are both very common here. This allows us to stay on top of our supply of bone spears. With no power-ups to collect, it's time for us to tackle the Planestalker. Now while the fight itself is not too difficult, its close range attack can very easily catch you off guard, dealing a nasty amount of damage to you. The easiest way to fight the Planestalker is to keep your distance and wait for it to leap at you. Just before it lands, you can land a spear attack, and if you were early enough you can land a second one as well. The Planestalker will dodge most of your attacks, so you need to hit it while it's still in its attack animation for a guaranteed hit. It sounds harder than it is, but once you've actually tried it yourself, the timing is pretty simple. With the Planestalker defeated, it's time for us to return to the boat. Since we cannot use ranged weapons, the only use we have for the Planestalker horn is for the bag rack on the boat. While that does sound useless, bags actually have more space than containers at each upgrade, so you are often better off using bag racks instead. Gather up palm fronds to make palm bags to put on your racks, a very cost efficient method of storage. I then used the bamboo to make a few upgrades to the boat, and then it was off to exploring again. Actually, scratch that. The second chapter was very mean with treasure and I didn't really find anything significant. Better off just heading to the second crossing. What's different about the crossing now is that I have a bigger boat, and you probably will too, which makes some of the obstacles more difficult to dodge. So why would you use a bigger boat? Well, where else are you going to keep your stuff? You'll have to roll with it. Don't do what I did, half my boat broke. What to do is keep an eye on the wind and change the angle of your sail to match it, and use small movements when controlling your boat. If you go too far, too fast, you're a goner, and that is a fact. None of the blessings on offer were very game-changing. I wasn't interested in swimming too often, and Immakel's eye is a ranged weapon. I couldn't afford it anyway. I made some repairs to the boat at the last second, like literally the last second, and then made my way to chapter 3. I got excited to see a fairly big island to start off chapter 3, but it barely had anything on it apart from the Nautilus Tower. As usual, kill a few Razorbacks to stock up on weapons and get moving. Chapter 3 introduces the very dangerous forest biome. With the forest biome comes fluttercups and sea lilies, which we can combine with blood bristles for a nice upgrade later on. The forest also greets us with silk maws and gloom harrows, both very important creatures in this run. When exploring the forest, it's important that you sneak as much as you can and keep an eye on the trees, otherwise, silk maw ambush. Also, don't be afraid to revisit biomes you've been to in previous chapters because it never hurts to stock up. A very simple way to kill silk maws is approach their nest with your spear in hand, hold the lock-on button as soon as you hear them hatch, and press attack as soon as they hit the ground. This will kill all 4 of them in one go and saves you the hassle of being vulnerable running around the forest. This method works with a stick spear, so to save your durability on your stronger weapons you could craft a stick spear just for this. I would be lying if I said the Gloom Harrow is a straightforward boss, because it's far from it, there's too much randomness. However, this method works pretty consistently. Hold on, let me get a drink. The best thing to do is attack first. The Gloom Harrow is quite a timid creature and will teleport around and try and attack at a range. Try to fight it in a tight space since it can't teleport very far. If it hits you with its ranged attack you will get poisoned, so don't let this happen. Like the Gorehorn, stay as close as possible. If there is an invisible object in your way, that is where the Gloom Harrow is. Wait for it to reappear and attack. It will then try to attack you. If you dodge away from the attack you can try and hit again. Don't worry if you miss it, it is unlikely you will hit it after it attacks back anyway. Then stay wary of the sound and listen to where it reappears. Rinse and repeat and you've got yourself some valuable resources. Returning to the boat, we have got some major upgrades to make. The flowers we've gathered can be combined to make a food bag, which gives us more space than a palm bag and also slows spoilage of any food you are carrying in it. Although make sure the food is actually in the bag and not inhaled, otherwise the effect doesn't apply. The silk thread can be combined with some leather to make a glider, giving us safe passage away from the future Nautilus Towers and any other high up areas. We can also use the Gloom Harrow jaw to build an axe. If you're wondering why the axe is available at such a later stage, it's because wood is the best boat material, and early access to it would be a bit broken. To make wooden boat parts you need a lot of silk thread and leather, so hopefully you gathered up a lot of them too. The Gloom Harrow skin can also be crafted into shrouded clothes, making you more difficult to spot, but I skipped these since they would become obsolete very soon. I then continued my exploration in search of gemstones, but I had no luck, so it's crossing time. With our new boat upgrades, the crossing is a lot easier, but there's still plenty of room for error. Like before, smaller movements are better than trying to steer a tight turn, otherwise you could crash into something very fast. Even with tougher boat parts, a fast crash can easily one-shot some of them, so be very careful. At the Blessing Shrine, I was offered potentially the best blessing for this challenge, called Ica's Barbs. What it does is it makes all weapons cause damage over time. It doesn't seem like a lot of extra damage in practice, it will save you maybe 1 or 2 spear strikes, but that's 1 or 2 mistakes covered, so it's definitely worthwhile. It's probably quite late to mention that pots are very useful in this challenge. With a small chance of grabbing a piece of metal earlier than normal, this opens up an upgrade that proves to be very useful. At the first island in chapter 4, I needed to make a few more upgrades. I was coming up to working with metal and realised I had no clay to do so I made a bone shovel and started digging. With the bit of extra wood I had gathered, I extended the size of the boat to fit a clay kiln, which is used when working with metal. I had the resources to build a metal spear, so I made sure I crafted this huge upgrade before moving on. With my brand new boat, I set out on my adventure once again. I constantly found small swamps with no space for any loot and was starting to get really annoyed. I somehow found all 3 pumpkins in this run and wondered how no other decent drops were spawning. Until this chapter. A lucky drop in a small forest was a green gem deposit. Now while we cannot craft the Bastion bow, I would not have done this in a ranged only run anyway since the Gorehorn figurehead is far more useful. Build this onto your bow and it becomes practically invulnerable. You can finally stop worrying about crashing your bow. And with this upgrade, the crossing is much more fun than stressful. No matter how hard you hit something, absolutely no damage will be inflicted, and if you run over some jellyfish, you're not going to take any damage from their stings. If you like, you can spend all your shards at the 4th Blessing Shrine since there are no more after this, unless you choose to play New Game Plus. While I didn't use it, Neckla's Rage is a very useful blessing if you require some crowd control. It sends out a blast around you, knocking enemies back and killing much weaker ones. Something to consider when fighting those stupid silk maws. Chapter 5 started off like any other chapter, a simple plains biome to fill up on basic resources as well as the Nautilus Tower right there. With that out of the way, I continued my search of resources and headed towards what I thought was a savanna biome until I quickly realised I was very, very wrong. Make no mistake, the Tremorlurk is one of, if not the most dangerous creature in the entire game. It does so much damage in one hit, you cannot possibly take the risk of fighting him with no armour. One will be in the desert biome at a time, and you can only see it if you notice the rocks coming out of the ground from where it's crawling, so be very wary of these. The desert is also littered with slitherfangs and bumblers, which are easy sources of meat, as well as some crude metal deposits that I made sure to look out for as well. An early exploration of the desert is risky, but I needed the metal. The Tremorlurk managed to catch up with me, and it was guarding some metal, so I had to make sure it lost me. It won't attack you if you stand on top of rocks, but if you try to run at the wrong time, it will catch up to you very fast. The music indicators work the same for the Tremorlurk, only this time you can't see it, so just be as cautious as possible when exploring the desert. Since I hadn't found one yet, I started my search for a bigger swamp. Swamps are usually quite rich in metal deposits, so this was an easy opportunity to collect some and put it towards armour. I did eventually find a swamp with a huge amount of metal ore. I listened out for a pond womper while doing so and eventually found one, so it was time to begin the next fight. Now at first the pond womper is very overwhelming. It has a ranged attack and a closer ranged attack and will hide in its shell and release poison if you get too close. All its attacks will poison you in fact. You can essentially cheese this fight by getting too close and waiting for it to turtle up. When it stands back up, run in for a hit and then wait for it to start crawling back into its shell. If you run away too early, it will use its poison burst attack, which is more annoying than anything else. Once you get the timing down, it's very easy, but I was surrounded by bumblers for some reason, which made this fight annoying over anything else. The pond womper's shell fragments can be turned into boat armour, and the poison glands can be turned into poison bombs. Now since our boat is invincible and we aren't using ranged weapons, this whole fight was just, well, pointless. But I'm proving all bosses can be killed in this challenge, so I was not going to leave out the pond womper. After a final search for leather, it was time to gear up for the final boss fight. Metal armour is enough to take out the Tremorlurk, but if you want to make more gear than that, don't be afraid to. If you do choose to make more gear, don't forget about the armoured bag. I've returned to the desert and searched for the Tremorlurk. This boss only has 2 attacks, but the boss itself is almost always an active hitbox. Basically, don't touch it when it's crawling in the ground. When it's crawling in the ground, it will either dive straight at you, which you will dodge, or it will show its back and then rush straight under you. When the ground shakes below you, dodge out of the way and the Tremorlurk will be vulnerable to 2 spear attacks, 3 if you're lucky. Ica's barbs will make this fight a little easier, providing some extra damage, but it is still a challenge. You will deal more damage to it if you hit the skin instead of the shell. When killed, the Tremorlurk drops one of the 3 coloured gemstones. At the time of this recording, the Tremorlurk will not drop anything after the first kill, so don't stick around to farm it. Either way, it's not worth it in this challenge. If you make it this far, then congratulations, you have completed the Windbound Valkyrie challenge. Now all you need to do is finish the final crossing. This final segment is laughable with all the power-ups we've gathered in the run. I almost did this in one clean shot with no crashes or sinking, but unfortunately I wasn't that lucky. And when the Nautilus smashes our boat scarily close to the gold portal, the challenge is officially completed. This was far, far more difficult than our last challenge, and this took me a few days to record rather than 3 hours. As usual, be sure to like and subscribe for more content, and comment down below any tips you would add to this challenge or any of the other big challenges you want to see me cover. Thank you all for watching, and I hope to see you again in the next one.